Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Well, this is a bit of an unplanned video I wasn't really expecting to make. A little while ago it was announced that almost all Classic Who episodes were going to finally be added to BBC iPlayer, so we didn't have to head to the high seas every time we wanted to watch Classic Who for free. But just a couple of days before all these episodes dropped, news broke of an accompanying series called Tales of the Tardis. These are essentially in-universe recaps of select Classic Who stories, with specially filmed bookends as characters reflect on their own adventures with the Doctor. It offers the chance to reunite with old friends and see a unique presentation of Classic Who stories, opening up the show's past for new audiences and younger viewers. But is it good? Does it breathe life into some of Classic Who stories, or is it just nostalgic filler? Well, as always, that's what I'm here to find out. So join me on a trip into time, space, and BBC iPlayer, because it's time to take a deep dive into Tales of the Tardis.
We never really did this sort of thing, did we?
We do now.
Tales of the Tardis is the first entry in the officially named Whoniverse, which promises all sorts of spin-offs and new material for the show's universe, complete with a whole pre-roll ident sequence boasting the show's long history in a similar way to Disney Plus with Star Wars, so it's an ambitious and welcome promise of more to come. Tales of the Tardis itself was actually made on a pretty short notice, all things considered, but it breathes a lot of nice life into this so-called Whoniverse right from the get-go, immediately setting that stage for all sorts of full spin-offs and other small additional productions like this one. It gives us some sweet overdue live action reunions, and it's an easy thing to feature as bonus content for fans, since the bulk of the material already exists, taking the form of these omnibus edits of particularly notable Classic Who stories, showcasing the original run of Doctor Who in its best possible light, especially because all but one of the serials featured were already restored for the collection box sets, so they're in high quality already and not that lovely pixelated DVD crunchiness. These edits are fine for what they are, just slightly trimmed down versions of the serials, and the truncated format means it's easier to engage with, cutting out things like intros and credits along with some unnecessary scenes here and there. Not only does it help with the pacing of things to interest new audiences, it's also justified well within the context of the series, the storytelling framing devices allowing for some details and unimportant events to be skipped over, because nobody can ever retell a story with perfect one-to-one detail and accuracy, especially after these characters have lived for so long since then. Indeed, whilst the omnibus Classic Who stories are the bulk of these episodes, the true appeal for most fans are those bookend segments featuring a lot of familiar faces as they guide us through these adventures. Tales of the Tardis actually has its roots in Doctor Who's so-called wilderness years. Classic Who stories had started to be released on VHS in 1983, but after the show's cancellation things really started to heat up, with more and more stories released each year on these strange rectangular relic things. In 1992 they released Sharda, a famously unfinished story from season 17. There were lots of gaps where strikes had prevented filming, so this VHS tape release used Tom Baker in semi-character as the Fourth Doctor, filling us in on all the action we weren't able to see, with narration and interludes completing the story for us. It was a successful approach and worked well, so it was revisited the following year with plans for missing stories like the Reign of Terror to feature narration from Carol Ann Ford, who played Susan Foreman, and the 10th Planet being narrated by Michael Craze, who played Ben. These ones didn't come to pass, but later years blessed us with The Invasion and The Crusade, featuring narration from Nicholas Courtney and William Russell respectively. Despite these stories having entire missing segments and missing episodes, the link-in narration helped to flesh out the stories and breathe new life into them, along with having that added bonus of the nostalgia element, seeing all those returning faces again. It's the same with the collection trailers made to announce each new edition of the Classic Who Blu-ray box sets. These are in-universe revisitations of characters seeing what they get up to after leaving their TARDIS travels, unique framing devices to advertise the re-releases of all these classic stories, and Tales of the TARDIS is really kind of a marriage of these two concepts, combining those link-in narrations of the VHS releases with the Where Are They Now narratives of the collection trailers. It's a fantastic way to once again freshen up older stories and make them appealing to new people. Indeed, each episode of Tales of the TARDIS opens and closes in what's known as a memory TARDIS, which can reach out and remember all these pairings and the adventures they went on, since it needs stories to survive. This makeshift TARDIS interior is absolutely gorgeous, a beautiful mismatch of existing components with multiple consoles, roundels, and then more unique fixtures such as the TV movie Steel Arms and the First Doctor's light thing. Along with this, there are all sorts of props scattered around, visually representing the wonderful history of the show, just like the intro sequence, which has the original theme and a collage of every Classic Who title sequence. The memory TARDIS has a bit of everything from the show, and it almost looks like a junkyard in a way, which is obviously fitting considering the show itself began in a junkyard full of relics and forgotten treasures. A setting like this is an interesting concept, and in-universe justification for these pairings, so I don't care if the idea fits into continuity or not. Like, you'll probably get hardcore fans saying stuff like, well actually, in the 1994 book Jimothy Green and the Time Crusaders, just enjoy it. It's charming technobabble allowing these duos to come together, and it works well enough. It needs to feed off stories, so it summons these familiar pairings and encourages them to recount their adventures around a metaphorical campfire, which is brilliantly represented by the model of the 13th Doctor's bright yellowy orange console room. I love how these segments transition into the Classic Who stories, with all sorts of slick transitions along with a screen cropping in and out of the 4:3 aspect ratio, reminiscent of Twice Upon a Time in that sense, blending the aspect ratios without ever making a change too jarring or awkward. So let's talk about the individual episodes, starting with Earthshock, which opens as the 5th Doctor frantically looks for a kettle, only for his former companion Tegan to magically show up all confused because she'd just been ready to go to sleep. And yes, if you're a Tegan and Nyssa shipper like Russell T Davies clearly is, you'll be eating good with this one.
I said goodnight to Nyssa.
I know Davison and Fielding previously reunited as their characters in Power of the Doctor, but this moment still feels really special as the 5th Doctor and Tegan meet once again in person, with a newfound fondness for each other. After reconciling in that special, they can be more like old friends here, which is really sweet to see, and it's clear that these two actors love being around each other.
I've missed you.
I missed you too.
Given the emotional significance of the events of Earthshock to these characters, I like how it's introduced as a difficult story to tell, with Tegan reluctant to relive those traumatic events. It helps to set the dark tone of the serial. And of course, after the Earthshock story ends, we cut back to the older Five and Tegan, with those wounds still clearly evident, remembering the loss of a friend just like anyone else would. In a meta way, addresses how quickly they all moved on from Adric's death, which was pretty much forgotten about immediately after it happened. Here the Doctor admits to his flawed nature of running away and never looking back, something the modern show has analysed time and time again, but Classic Who rarely got the opportunity to, so it's really nice to finally have that sense of closure for the characters. The episode ends with the 5th Doctor imploring Tegan to tell him tales of her life after leaving him, even though she thinks they're boring. It's another sweet touch, another piece of New Who storytelling transposed onto these Classic Who characters, showing how Tegan's life with the Doctor has inspired her and changed her for the better, a very optimistic and lovely way to end things. Episode 2 centres around the Season 6 story The Mind Robber, and it's interesting in the sense that it doesn't feature a Doctor at all, due to Patrick Troughton's death in 1987. And you know, even if he was still alive, he'd be like 103, and that's probably not exactly the best position to act in. Instead, we get the reunion of his final companions, Jamie McCrimmon and Zoe Herriot, who famously had their memories erased at the end of their adventures. I appreciate that this short acknowledges this, since their departure was one of the saddest companion departures of any companion, long before Donna underwent a similar fate. This makes it extra special to see these two old friends together again, with their memories restored through magical means. I think it's just fantastic that they get this chance that they probably wouldn't have otherwise been given due to the main show always moving forward. Obviously both Fraser Hines and Wendy Padbury had returned as their characters in multiple Big Finish audios, so they're still comfortable in their roles, but this is their first live action return, and it's nice to catch up with them and learn what happened after the show itself left them behind. They have families now, and Zoe is president, with their memories of the Doctor still existing deep in the back of their mind and inspiring them to achieve so much. Hell, Zoe even unconsciously names her son James without realising it's a tribute to her former companion. It all provides closure to one of the biggest loose ends of the show, giving us concrete answers as to where they went next compared to the usual chaos of expanded media having so many contrasting opinions. And after recounting the Mind Robber, the two companions wish they could stay on the memory TARDIS forever, not wanting to lose their memories again. I can't say I like the idea of their memories being permanently restored as Zoe implies they have been. We're already getting Donna's memory erasure undone in the 60th, so I feel like it cheapens the impact of their exit if they just get to have their memories back anyway. It's important for the show to have sad companion endings remain permanent sometimes. There could have easily been a middle ground giving the audience closure on Jamie and Zoe's lives whilst maintaining the tragedy of their departure. That's really just one small blemish in an otherwise sweet and fulfilling reunion. When it comes to the Vengeance on Varys episode, I immediately want to lament the fact that Colin Baker doesn't wear the actual 6th Doctor costume. I know he's never really been a fan of it, but they could have at least used a blue variant from Expanded Media or some other compromise, because it's hard to see him as the Doctor here instead of Colin Baker as himself, especially with the whole beard situation. However, with that minor nitpick aside, it's another great reunion as Perry materialises in front of the Doctor. Much like the other pairings, we get to see how Perry is getting on after leaving the Life of Adventure, with this short sticking with a Warrior Queen continuity compared to the many other confusing Perry timelines. Seriously, it's a mess. This is one of the weaker episodes for me personally, probably because I have no real connection to the Sixth Doctor era or its characters. However, the acting from the pair is nice, especially from Nicola Bryant, and the Doctor has a wonderful speech about the memory TARDIS, with the two characters genuinely missing each other deeply and lamenting how long it's taken for them to see each other again. What follows is the very dark, very good Vengeance on Varos, which some might say is a classic, and you will love it. Perry suggesting that 21st Century Earth reminds her of Varos does get a little bit like, we live in a literally 1984 society, but it sets the foundation for the Doctor's optimistic speech of good being possible anywhere, no matter how dark things might seem, twisting the dark and oppressive dystopian story into something very nice and optimistic. In the end, the Doctor and Perry decide to travel again in this memory TARDIS, even somewhat tying into the Season 22 collection trailer a bit to maintain some continuity there. It's a wonderful note to end the episode on, these two old friends wanting just a few more adventures to find the good in the universe and save people in need.
The two of us, we're warriors of the universe.
The Three Doctors is an interesting episode of Tales of the TARDIS because poor Katie Manning doesn't really have anyone left from the actual era to share the screen with. Out of the cast of the Three Doctors, only John Levine is still with us, but he's 81 and might not have been in the best of health when these were filmed, or maybe he just wasn't available, who knows. Regardless, the episode begins with Clyde Langer inside the memory TARDIS, goofing around before being reunited with Jo Jones, who he had of course met during the Sarah Jane adventures. It's a real treat to be able to see them together again, especially as they geek out over sonic screwdrivers and Katie Manning gets to be the adorable space grandma she genuinely seems to be. It's a much more comedic edition of the series, with writer Phil Ford re-establishing the tone of the Sarah Jane adventures he wrote for. However, despite those broad comedic strokes, I appreciate the tender moments like the little nods to Sarah Jane herself, along with acknowledging the real-life death of Stuart Bevan, Katie Manning's real-life former partner and close friend who played Jo Grant's husband Cliff Jones. They're touching tributes reminding us that these important characters aren't forgotten about. We also get updates on where the Sarah Jane Adventures gang are now, with Luke and his husband off doing science experiments in space for UNIT, Clyde's comics being adapted for TV, and Ronnie being a hard-hitting journalist just like Sarah Jane before her. I think it's a nice through line that Clyde and Jo bond over missing the old days of action and adventure.
You know, darling, the older you get, the more and more you miss.
However, despite the episode being more comedic, it takes a really emotional turn as Jo begs Clyde to confess his feelings for Rani, knowing from experience that he shouldn't waste any more time. It's a really cute moment, and I imagine it was a dream come true for a lot of shippers out there. I would admit this episode hit me in the feels quite a bit and made me tear up a little bit, especially as Jo finds the Metebelis 3 crystal and holds it close, remembering the Third Doctor as the music swells and Cliff's silhouette appears in the TARDIS, bringing that couple together once again. The Time Meddler edition of Tales of the TARDIS lovingly reunites Stephen and Vicky, two of the first Doctor's iconic companions. Even though they only shared 3 stories together as proper companions, it's still sweet to see them together after so many years, both having gone on to lead wonderful lives and being able to reminisce on everything. Despite these actors having left the show a whopping 56 and 57 years ago, they're still able to slip into character so effortlessly and reignite their sibling-like relationship, fondly remembering the chaos of the Time Meddler. It's a slower paced segment because of the two actors' ages. Maureen O'Brien is 80 and Peter Purvis is 84, so it's not like they could dash around the set with lots of quippy lines like some of the other pairings are able to do. However, it's still nice to see them reunited, especially with Stephen updating Vicky on the monk escaping his predicament and returning in the Daleks' master plan. It's really touching as they remember the First Doctor. For all their combined personal flaws, Purvis has been on record to say how well he and Hartnell got along, so I feel like a lot of these words are genuine personal feelings of the actors remembering Hartnell fondly from their time together on the show. The First Doctor feels quite distant in a sense, with Hartnell having died in the 70s. but these are people who genuinely worked with him, and it's nice how the episode brings the First Doctor back to life in a way, suggesting he's still there watching them on a monitor somewhere, before the companions are then able to summon him to appear off screen. Such a wonderful touch, even if it was just an archive recording of his iconic laugh. The sixth and final Tales of the TARDIS is arguably one of the more narratively significant in my opinion, pairing Ace with the Seventh Doctor once again, this time in person unlike Power of the Doctor, which was merely a hologram projection. Much like with Tegan, this takes place after that special, with Seven giving a bit of technobabble explanation as to why he's older. Like always with Doctor Who, just blame the time streams. There's a lot of energy and dynamic charisma here, with the pair absolutely loving being together again on screen, and like the Earthshock edition, the episode confronts a lack of closure, considering Seven and Ace never had a proper on-screen departure because of the show's cancellation after season 26. It's also an episode about facing difficult truths, embracing the consequences of the Curse of Fenric. Season 26 really tested this pairing and pushed them to the limit, but we never got to see the lasting effects of that. This gives us that chance, having the Doctor and Ace finally sit down and talk things through.
We never talked about it. What happened that day?
The Doctor finally takes accountability for rushing around and not caring about the effect he was having on Ace, using her and keeping all these secrets. Like I said, it's probably the most important Tales of the TARDIS episode, embracing this glaring lack of an ending. Hell, we also even get a rare mention of an off-screen encounter with the Rani. I wonder if that means the rights have finally been sorted out, which you know would be just my luck after I made a whole video about how she'll never return. Anyway, as I was saying, this episode is a beautiful and emotional coda for the Doctor and Ace.
I think it's time to grow up.
They can finally move on from that bitterness and trauma, able to go off on an adventure together as true equals. The Doctor no longer this manipulative puppet master using his own friend as a chess piece. They're genuinely friends and equals now, something shown wonderfully as the pair together recite the iconic speech from the end of Survival and pilot the TARDIS again as equals. It's really emotional and inspiring, an equally optimistic yet more definitive ending for the Doctor and Ace. When it comes to Tales of the TARDIS, it's important to remind yourself that it's essentially just bonus content, a little bit of added material for fans to enjoy. It's not a full-blown spin-off show, so it shouldn't be judged as one, but it still gives us nearly an hour of brand new in-universe content, reuniting a lot of significant duos and giving their stories a sense of closure, with all these backstories and new endings for them. A few people said they were disappointed that it was just simple bookends, but I really don't know what they expected. It's exactly as it was advertised, just the bulk being the classic Who stories with these little beginning and endings added on just for fun. I will admit it does feel a little bit CBBC at points, but I'd never really hold that against it because it can help get younger viewers into classic Who, using this framing device to hook them and get them interested. The omnibus edits are fine for what they are as introductions to the show's past, with a really lovely and cozy TARDIS set emphasising that history. It is a shame that there's no 4th or 8th Doctor stuff, but I understand why. The 4th Doctor era has so few characters and actors available, and the 8th Doctor is wrapped up in all the TV movie rights, but I feel like they could have at least gotten one of his Big Finish companions in, similar to Joe and Clyde being for the 3 Doctors. Alas, what we do get is a nice collection of nostalgic reunions and touching moments, showcasing a real love for the history of Doctor Who. It's a great first step into this so-called Whoniverse, and there's room for more episodes or more bonus content like it, so it's a great sign of what's to come. Unfortunately, Tales of the TARDIS is unique to iPlayer alone, which makes it completely inaccessible to international fans. This is a real negative in the digital age, as the show is more global than ever, so that's a big portion of the fanbase locked out of the content with no choice but to pirate it or watch it on YouTube. We can only hope for some sort of physical release or distribution down the line. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Tales of the TARDIS. What did you think? Is it worth a watch? Is it missed potential? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patrons, Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franzon aka Line Vortex, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.